Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the World Wanderers podcast. We are so excited that you've decided to join us for today's episode of the show. Today on the podcast, we are going to be continuing our Quarantined Around the World special series where we are talking to friends who are quarantined in different countries around the world. And if you missed last week's episode of the podcast, you can find a link in the show notes, or you can find the episode probably just below this one. And we were able to talk with two friends who are quarantined in South America. So one is our friend Vina, who's currently in Panama. The other one is our friend Ali, who's currently in Argentina. And actually, since we recorded with both of them, both of those countries have extended their lockdowns and also made changes to their rules and regulations. Both countries have actually both announced that their airports are going to be closed for the next 30 days, maybe a little bit less than 30 days now. So definitely go back, listen to their stories. It's super interesting to hear what other countries are up to. And we are super excited for you guys to hear today's stories. But before we dive into that, we just wanted to give you a quick little update as to where we're at and how things in Canada are going.
Yeah, so when we came back to Canada, we were kind of just leaving a lot of stuff in limbo and trying to just remain flexible depending on how long things took. So we continued having our apartment, we paid rent, waiting to see if there was a chance for us to go back in Panama. And as things have gone on, definitely seems like the best decision for us is to hunker down and to stay in Alberta and stay in Canada for who knows how long. That's, I guess, still a question mark at this point. But we found a place on our own. It's kind of interesting at this time doing stuff like finding an apartment and then going about moving into it when we're in such a weird time, essentially. But we did find a place we're both really excited about, and we're going to be moving into that in just a couple days. So when you're listening to this episode, we'll probably be shuffling our belongings into a new apartment and getting ready to hunker down there for a little while.
Yes, we are so lucky that we've had places to stay with our parents over the last 6 weeks, almost 2 months now that we've been home, but we are really excited to be moving into our own place very, very soon and just really settling down into life back in Canada. It's been fun being back. This is a month of the year that we're not usually back in. So we've been getting tastes of winter and then spring as well. And in terms of where things are at with the virus here in Canada, we've started to see a small drop off in the number of cases per day. There's still quite a few cases and obviously still lots of people new getting sick, but there has started to be some conversation in terms of what next steps are. So it seems like we're going to be at home for the next couple of months. But as summer rolls around, we're really hoping that at the very least we can get outside, do some hikes and that sort of thing. Right now, all provincial and national parks across Canada are closed. So as of right now, there's pretty much no adventuring that we can do other than going to the grocery store and taking walks in our community. And of course, we're totally fine with that for now, but we're excited to hear that things are progressing in a positive fashion in Canada. And we're hoping that soon we'll be able to enjoy the outdoors a little bit more. So that's what life is like here in Canada. Not super interesting, but at this point with where we're at in the pandemic, I think that's something to be grateful for. And we are just so grateful to be able to continue making the podcast and to continue bringing you episodes. And so we are going to kick off this episode with a special conversation with our friends Sasha and Rachel from Grateful Gypsies. And Sasha and Rachel are joining us in this conversation from Medellin, Colombia. Sasha and Rachel have since had a change in what they're doing and where they're at, and we will give a little update about that after you hear this segment and what things are like in Colombia.
All right, Sasha and Rachel, thank you for joining us on this. I guess I feel weird calling it a special edition of the podcast, but thanks for joining us nonetheless.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
World Wanderers quarantine special.
Yeah. So we were hanging out not that long ago where things were not that weird in February in Colombia. And I remember even I don't know, maybe 4 weeks ago, talking about like, hey, what are you guys going to do after Colombia? Are you going to come to Panama? And now obviously kind of everything's in flux. But do you want to just walk us through kind of what the past couple weeks have been like, maybe from like when things started to like look like there might be a quarantine in Colombia to kind of where it is now?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Now that you mention that, it was only
It all happened so fast.
a little more than a month ago, I guess, right? That we were hanging out in Barranquilla.
Yeah.
And it feels like it was way, way longer than that.
It was like 5 weeks. It feels more like 5 months.
Yeah.
Given all the things that have happened.
I'm just glad that we all did that because
Me too.
that was a lot of fun. And now look where we are now. Looking back at that, it's like, oh, that was great. I'm really glad we did that.
Yeah.
I guess at that time, right, when we were in Barranquilla, obviously everybody was talking about the virus, and we were, teaching kids in China as we always do, and they've been dealing with it for months. So it's been, in the back of our heads ever since it started, just because we've been talking to kids over there who had to have their Chinese New Year travels canceled and their return to school got delayed. So we've been tracking it since day one, basically, right?
Oh yeah, I've been following this in the news since early January. But Colombia got their first case on March 6th, which wasn't even a whole week after we got back, because after we said goodbye to you guys, we went to the beach. And it was a couple more days before we came back here to Medellin. And
then the first reported case was a few days later.
Yeah. And at the time, the U.S. was beginning to announce that they were suspending all flights from Europe, and a lot of countries were starting to close their borders. This was the time when most countries in Europe closed their borders. Italy was becoming more and more the epicenter.
Yeah.
And we kind of figured that a quarantine was only a matter of time here, because in just a few short days after they got their first confirmed case here, they also announced that they were suspending all international flights and shutting the borders.
Let's pause there, though. I think we're moving a little too fast because it did happen really fast. But before we get to all the closures and stuff, when we got back here after our little trip with you guys and our trip to the beach, we just went about, because we were supposed to stay here for a month, right?
Mm-hmm.
We just went about our normal routine.
So when were you guys originally supposed to leave?
On the 30th of March. We had paid up for the whole month of March, and when we got back here from the beach, we just went about our normal routine. We had found a gym before we went to Barranquilla, so we went back there and paid them for a month. And I had signed up for 2 weeks of Spanish class. Rachel was getting into her groove, working on her course, loaded up on groceries. And it was just like, okay, here we go. It's gonna be like a normal month, right? Normal nomad month for us. And I went to Spanish class on Monday, the 9th of March, I guess, and had a group class. And there was some chatter about, the news and what's going on with the virus and stuff, those first couple days of class. But it wasn't until like Friday that all of us in the class were like, shit, this is like real serious. Because my classmates were all just passing through. They were just in Medellin
backpacking around
for
South
a week
America.
to work on their Spanish, do some walking tours, do some salsa dancing, the things people come here for. But they were all planning on going to Peru or Ecuador, Brazil, whatever, within a few days there. And so these guys were starting to come to class saying like, well, looks like maybe I can't go there, and now maybe I have to go back to Europe. There was one Dutch girl and one German guy. They were like, I guess I'm going to cut the trip short, or I don't know, maybe we're going to get stuck here. And I'm just thinking, well, we were going to stay here all month. So
this was about the time where Ecuador closed their borders.
Which
was probably a big deal for a lot of your classmates.
Yeah. And then it was like, okay, Colombia started announcing they're going to shut down all flights in, which they had said at that time, like, oh, foreigners will still be able to leave. But we immediately thought, how's that going to work? If no planes are coming in, what planes are going to be leaving? This doesn't add up. So that's when we realized, like, we have this very short window of time here where we can get out if we want to that week. And I was like, well, we paid rent for 3 more weeks from that time. And I had the next week of Spanish, and we had just paid for the gym. And I'm still like, they're not going to shut everything down, are they? We already paid for all this stuff. We already got set up here and got comfortable. We're just going to pull the ripcord and fly back to the U.S. I don't know, right? I guess we kind of considered it, but
no, we considered going back to Mexico earlier than we had
the main
on.
consideration was just going back to Puerto Vallarta earlier than planned. But our place wasn't supposed to be open, so we're like, well, we've already paid rent here. We're going to go back there and have to find a different place. until we can move into our place. It just didn't seem like a good idea.
Well, we were also communicating with you guys at the time.
About going to Panama, yeah.
We had been trying to make these plans to take the boat trip from Colombia to Panama through the San Blas Islands. And then you guys told us that they were closed. And so that was when we were like, okay, that's not happening, obviously. And that was when we really started talking about just going back to Mexico early.
Right. Should have mentioned that. Totally forgot about that. It was like, we worked so hard to set up that boat trip.
For Semana Santa? And I was like, I don't even know if we're going to be here, because stuff moves so fast in Panama too, like really similar timeline.
They shut it down. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a little bit earlier than Colombia. It was like clear that we weren't going to be able to go to Panama, right?
Yeah.
Despite putting forth a lot of effort to make that boat trip happen. I really hope we get to do it someday.
They said they would welcome us.
Yeah, we're welcome whenever it is possible. It was a huge bummer. But after that became clear we couldn't do that. The options were very limited. So we kind of thought about going back to PV and then decided not to. And the following Monday, I switched to private lessons at the school. I went to the gym. There was nobody there, and there was a ton of hand sanitizer. So that was like immediately very different. And I went to my class and had a private lesson for 2 hours. And at the end of the class, the receptionist came in and was like, yeah, the government just told us we have to close tomorrow, so you can switch to Skype lessons. And came home, told Rachel that. And the next day we tried to walk to the gym because they have a little shop there with fitness equipment. We were just going to see what we could get because we smelled the quarantine coming, right? And we got there and they were shuttered, completely closed. So then
most businesses were closed on
that was Tuesday,
particular Tuesday, and then
16th or whatever.
And then 17th. It was the following Friday where they announced the quarantine, the actual curfew. And at first it was only going to be for 4 days, but then on the second night?
No, it was the first night. It was a couple hours into it.
Okay.
Right? It was on Friday. I don't know. It's confusing. So they announced a 4-day quarantine for the city of Medellin. The city was like, we're going to put this in ourselves because the president had not announced a nationwide one, despite getting pressure from people to do so. So the mayors of Medellin and Bogota were like, screw it. We're going to put in our own one because we think this has to be done. And they did that. And then right as the city ones were starting, the first or second day, the president kind of caved and was like, okay, nationwide quarantine starts on Wednesday. So they just kind of matched them up together to be a 23-day nationwide one.
Yeah, a 4-day quarantine with like a 20-day quarantine.
Yeah. And at that point, they even said no flight. It was like when they canceled flights, originally they had said Colombians could still return, their family members, diplomats, whatever, maybe even people with visas if you're a gringo, I don't know.
If you had a resident permit.
Yeah, that you were all allowed to come back. And then it was like, nope, starting on March 23rd, I think they said no flights. Doesn't matter if you're Colombian, nobody's getting into this country. Everything is shut down. No domestic flights, very limited bus routes. So then that was very clear, like, okay, we're stuck. We are absolutely stuck for the time being.
And so what was that like, kind of, as you guys are like reading that story or whatever, and you're like, oh, okay, we're just here now in quarantine for who knows how long? What was kind of going through your head at that point?
Well, I wasn't really that upset by it because
Rachel was already planning on being in self-imposed quarantine just for, catching up on all the work she needed to do.
Well, but aside from that, I was watching the way things were going in the U.S. and I was not impressed with the way the situation was being handled in the U.S.
or Mexico.
And I'm still not that impressed. So at the time, it seemed like the best decision was just to stay put because a lot of people were panicking and trying to get out. So airports were insanely busy and packed. And I just saw that as a way to seriously increase our risk of getting sick.
Mm-hmm.
I had been planning to launch my course at this time since the beginning of the year. So I suddenly had a reason to not feel guilty for not going outside.
Right.
So for me, it hasn't really been all that bad. I think my feelings might change once I do wrap up this launch,
which is in a couple days,
in this upcoming week. And I might feel a bit differently. Ask me again next weekend. But for now, it's been fine.
It's probably been worse for me than Rachel. I just I don't like being inside all the time. I need to get outside, even if it's just for a walk, or I really like going to a gym. I know I've been working out at home. I know it's possible. It's just like, I like the change of scenery, right? We don't really do co-working spaces, but once in a while we might go check one out if someone recommends it, or certainly go to a cafe, and there's tons of them in Medellin, and missed that already. Like just that freedom to put your computer in a bag and walk over to a coffee shop for lunch instead of like putting on a face mask and gloves to go to the grocery store. And we've ordered takeout or delivery twice in the quarantine. But other than that, we've cooked every single meal at home. Rachel hasn't even left the apartment.
Well, we also have a balcony, so I can like go outside without leaving the building. So that makes a huge difference. And we
get all the sun.
We have a sliding door for a window in the living room, and it faces the west. So we get direct sunlight for multiple hours a day, enough where I could even sunbathe.
Yeah, we put our little lawn chairs there and sunglasses on and like sunbathe indoors. So that helps a lot. If we were in a smaller place or didn't have the balcony, I would have gone crazy from cabin fever by now for sure.
Yeah, that's one thing we were thinking about. Like in our apartment, thankfully there's windows. Like unlike a lot of big apartment buildings in Canada, the US don't have windows because they don't want whatever might happen of having like big opening windows. But in Panama, we could open them, but we don't have a balcony. And we were like, what if we just have to like sit in here for like months? So we can't ever like go outside. But yeah, so what is it like now? Are you guys allowed to go out? Like, what are kind of the rules of the quarantine? Like, can you go outside when you need to get groceries, or how does all that work?
Yeah.
They just made a new rule a couple of days ago, only like 2 or 3 days ago, that you're allowed to, the days you can go out are dependent on the last number of your ID. And for us, our passports. So like for me, I can leave the house on Wednesdays and Sundays. And for Sasha, he can go out on Thursdays and Sundays. But you're only allowed to go out if you're going to the grocery store, the bank, or the pharmacy, or you're allowed to go on 20-minute walks in your immediate neighborhood if you have a
dog. I wish we had a freaking dog right now. I see all these people walking their dogs. I know. I see people walking their dogs. I'm like, lucky. So I went out this afternoon because it's Sunday when we're talking to you guys here. And I went into an Exito, which is a little supermarket chain here. And the guy was like, saw my gringo ass walk in, and it was only Rappi delivery drivers in there. Rappi's, for people who don't know, it's a app, and you can order basically anything. And it's mostly guys on motorbikes or bicycles who ride around. They'll go grocery shop for you, pick up, takeout for you. And it's only Rappi guys in there. I walk in, he was like, no, ID. I'm like, yeah, I got my ID. Look at the number. It's my day, right? Okay, let me continue and buy my bananas and beers, my essential items. I was checked today. I haven't been stopped by cops yet. I've had several cops go by me when I'm walking, and nobody stopped me to ask to see my papers, which has happened to some gringos here because, there was a thing, if you arrived before a certain date, you were supposed to be in 14-day isolation. Like there are gringos who were here traveling who were told when they checked into a hotel, like, okay, I know you only had a 2-night reservation, but congratulations, now it's 14 and you can't leave the hotel, and if you do, we have to report it to the police. So there were several gringos who got deported for breaking that quarantine. Yeah, several. And I guess they banned them from returning for like 5 or 7 years. I've heard both 5 and 7 years. So yeah, I mean, I think we both agree that it's tough to swallow this pill. It kind of sucks, but it's like, it's good that they're taking these extreme measures, because we look at where else we would have gone, back to the US or Mexico, and President of Mexico thinks his lucky amulets are going to stop the virus, and he's going around kissing babies and shaking hands, and they're having music festivals with 80,000 people, and flights are going as normal. Cruise ships were still coming in up until like a week ago, so.
Yeah, I keep getting
like it didn't look like a good idea to go back to either place.
Totally. Yeah, I keep getting promotions from Interjet. I have like the Interjet app on my phone, and they keep sending me notifications for flight deals. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? You need to stop these.
Right. And their flights from Interjet flights between Colombia and Mexico are shut down because Colombia has done that, but they're still going all over Mexico. So I don't know. I feel like, we're just going to see what happens here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so obviously, like, it's hard and you can't really make a plan, but I know you guys usually like to spend the summer in the States, and that kind of was the plan. Like, what are you guys kind of doing from here? Are you just thinking like be in that Airbnb until things end? Do you have any sense for when that might be? I know that's kind of a whole bunch of questions I just threw at you.
No, that's all right.
No, that's fine. We were just talking about this last night, and the problem is that there are just way too many variables and potentially different situations. So we were trying to come up with like a
scenarios.
Game plan for different scenarios. But that's also hard to do. The thing is, we can extend this apartment for, I think, as long as we need to, at least until the end of May. And so I think what we're going to do is we're going to ask him if we can just be on a week-to-week basis, so that if we do have an opportunity, because right now this quarantine is only supposed to go until April 13th. And then right now you can book flight tickets for like the 23rd and later, but Sasha's convinced that they're just going to extend it.
They finally put out an announcement yesterday. It said like next week we will reassess the situation about whether to continue the quarantine or just, kind of reopen things, but with some social distancing suggestions. I don't know. Like, I don't see how you really, go back to business as usual sort of and expect that people are going to like stand 6 feet away from each other.
But I think what we ultimately decided to do is if we can go to Puerto Vallarta, which was our next destination, then we'll do that because it's just getting us closer to home. But then if that's not possible, then we'll just go back to the States probably in May.
Yeah.
Because we didn't really have anything booked except for a couple of flights in May and June. And so
just to get, we like jumped on really cheap point deals. Like, it's usually hard to get to Rachel's hometown, and we usually end up taking a combination of different flight and a bus or a flight and a rental car. It's usually such an ordeal. And we were meant to be at a festival near Chicago at Memorial Day weekend, which is like late May for us. And then I had found flights directly to her hometown for practically nothing point-wise and just went ahead and booked them. Right?
Yeah. And then, so we might go back just so we can be in the States and take those flights if we can, just so it's not a total loss.
If quarantine life continues, extensively in Colombia and Mexico, I guess we were starting to feel like if we're just sitting around an apartment, why are we paying like rent? We're just like stuck here. We're not experiencing anything. Even if the festival that I work at has already been postponed till late August. So that's not happening when it was supposed to. And the concerts we were supposed to go the next weekend have been postponed till early September. So those plans are already kind of screwed. And the next thing we're waiting for is Fish's summer tour, which is supposed to start mid-July. I guess they had a little more time to make an announcement, but the way things are going, we're pretty positive that's going to be canceled. So that's tough. It's a tough thing to accept because we were really looking forward to the summer. We were still are supposed to be seeing, because they haven't canceled it yet, but Fish at our favorite venue on our 5-year wedding anniversary. And that's very likely not going to happen. So that's disappointing, but we might still, if it looks okay to do so, we might just go back to the US and, visit people in Chicago and take that flight to see Rachel's family and spend some time there, and then take the flight to see my family and reassess the situation. At that point, hopefully the things that have been rescheduled for August and September do get to happen. My brother and his girlfriend are supposed to be getting married in October in South Korea. And I just talked to him the other night. One way or the other, they want to get married on 10/10/2020. The date they picked out. So whether or not they're able to have this big grand wedding with people from all, over the place coming to it, they're still going to go ahead and tie the knot.
Yeah. Well, South Korea might be one of the best places to be in September. So who knows?
For sure. We just don't know about the travel.
Yeah. Actually getting there. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
And like if my parents are going to want to, my little sister booked a flight, but she was planning on quitting her job and starting a big adventure then anyway. So I think as long as it's okay to do so, she'll still go. For us, it's like we're just in the wait and see mode right now with everything.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard too if we open up travel again, but then every country has like a mandatory 14-day quarantine.
Yeah.
It's like if you want to go to China and Thailand and Indonesia and you have to do a quarantine in every single one of those places, no one's going to want to do that.
No one's going to want to do that. I think it's going to be a slow crawl with like travel resuming to somewhat normalcy. Right.
I don't think it'll ever go back to completely normal. But I do think that the travel industry will rebound. It might just take it a little bit longer, but it's rebounded from every major disruption in the last couple of years. It rebounded after 9/11. It rebounded after the recession back in 2008, 2009. And I think it'll rebound from this too.
This might take a bit. And as far as, I guess we're also like, our visas here are going to be up at the end of April. So when they make their announcement next week or whatever is when we're going to decide whether or not we're going to have to extend them, which is pretty easy to do. You can get an additional 90 days by going online, filling out some stuff, paying, I don't know how much. Yeah, it's apparently very easy.
Yeah, it's really easy to extend.
I guess we're also prepared for that possibility that we might extend 3 more months and end up using a vast majority of it if it comes to that.
Yeah.
I mean, the good thing is we like Medellin.
You got that eternal spring weather going for you
exactly.
there.
Yeah. It certainly could be worse.
It's transitioning into rainy season. So, but hey, if you're stuck inside, who cares? It's kind of nice watching the rain. I guess if the quarantine continues like seriously like it is now, like you can go outside twice a week and that's it. We're going to see if we could potentially move. I notice on my walks around to the supermarket and stuff, a lot of the apartment complexes here have like a little park or trail kind of thing around the building. And we just have a parking lot. So even to like move to someplace like that would be a major upgrade, right?
Mm-hmm. Better than pacing around your apartment to get your steps in.
Yeah. And like in our living room, we have a click clack for a couch, which has like jagged bars sticking up. It's so uncomfortable. So, and the TV's in the bedroom. So like, we're either sitting out here in this uncomfortable couch watching some TV on my computer, or we're in the bedroom on plastic lawn chairs watching on the TV. It's not a good setup for quarantine and chill life, really. I mean, I realize like I'm trying to not complain because we're super lucky. We have a roof over our head. We have a kitchen full of food.
Yeah.
We're able to talk to family and friends. We're busy
still
with
able to work.
I taught 45 classes last week, which I think is the most I've taught in a week in years.
Yeah.
So
wow.
Just
amazing.
trying to take that time to, if our students are booking classes, I'm just going to keep opening them. If they're, some of my students, both of our students are going back to school tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Others are going back the week after that. They're slowly starting to reopen.
They're all slowly trickling back into schools and will continue to make this transition through the middle of May.
Yeah. So in the meantime, we're still getting booked in the evenings, which usually only happens on weekends or holidays. So I guess on the bright side, we're working a lot, and the only thing we're spending money on is groceries and the occasional, food delivery.
Yeah. We feel you on that.
Happy
for sure.
For the heroes of this quarantine.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. Well, thank you guys for telling us about quarantine life in Colombia. If people want to follow you guys while you're in quarantine in Colombia, where can they go to do that?
Go to our YouTube channel, Grateful Gypsies, because I put together a little mini documentary of our first 4 quarantine days. It was something for me to do to pass the time. Then when it got extended to 23 days, I was like, I'm just going to edit the first 4. Nobody, it's just us in the apartment, But yeah, Grateful Gypsies everywhere, right?
Yeah, our blog is gratefulgypsies.com, and we're Grateful Gypsies on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. So that's probably the best place to see what we're up to. Definitely check out the video if you want to see what the quarantine life is really like. I think we got a blog post too that has the video and a little bit of a description of what's been going on here. So.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Good catching up.
So for a bit more context on our conversation with Sasha and Rachel, we recorded that on April the 5th. And so at that time, they mentioned in the episode about riding out the first kind of scheduled period of quarantine, which originally I think was supposed to be 21 days. And then Colombia since extended it. And Sasha and Rachel actually decided that they were going to take the next flight that was available out of Colombia. Colombia has closed down its borders, but is allowing certain humanitarian flights out. And so there was one out of Medellin that they were able to take back to Florida. So on April 21st, they took a flight and are now back and settled in the US. And they actually have a great video on their Facebook page. So if you go to Grateful Gypsies on Facebook, if you're curious, you can check out a video of them talking a bit more about their reasons for wanting to go and take that opportunity to leave. And I think a big thing for them was just the uncertainty of it all, of not knowing how long this is all going to go on for, of not really being able to have kind of any sense of how long they're going to be in their Airbnb in Colombia for, and just thinking with all that uncertainty, it was better to be back and closer to home. And so that's what they did, and they're back and set up and safe and healthy now.
Yeah. And so Sasha and Rachel are currently, I think, maybe halfway through their 14-day self-isolation that is mandatory to many countries around the world, including Canada. It's what Ryan and I did when we returned home to Canada a month ago, 6 weeks ago, whatever it was at this point. And so Sasha and Rachel are currently staying at a family member's house outside of Asheville, North Carolina, I believe it is. The Instagram stories have been super beautiful. They've got beautiful, lush mountains, and they've been doing some live video streaming. Sasha's been playing some music on their Instagram channel. So head on over, follow along, check out what they're up to, and you can follow along with their United States quarantined adventures going forward. And so we are just going to take a quick little break to hear from one of our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Audible. Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audiobooks, ranging from bestsellers to celebrity memoirs, news, business, and self-development. Every month, members get 1 credit to pick any title plus unlimited downloads on Audible originals. A recent Pew study found that 27% of adults say they haven't read a single book in the past year, up from 19% in 2011. Lack of the time being the main reason why. One of the things that we love about Audible is that it gives you time. It gives you time to start enjoying stories and taking in information. You can listen while commuting, cooking, exercising, gardening, or just relaxing at home. And on top of that, they have so many audiobooks to choose from.
One of my favorite audiobooks that I've been re-listening to lately is Sherlock Holmes. There are so many different Sherlock Holmes tales to get lost in, and on Audible, there is an edition that is narrated by Stephen Fry, which I think is the best one to listen to, and it's just an amazing audio experience that adds even more color and texture to these already incredible stories. So if you wanted to get started on Audible, you can go to audible.com/TWW or text TWW to 500-500 and get a free credit to use on any title and unlimited access to Audible originals. So that's audible.com/TWW or text TWW to 500-500. All right, we are back and moving on to our next segment where we're going to be chatting with Marilyn Borth.
Yeah, and we were super excited to catch up with Marilyn. We had her on the podcast ages ago, many years ago, and it was so fun to talk with her again. We've been following along with her journey, since we met her back in 2016. And when I say met, I mean met via the internet. And we've just been, watching as we've been traveling around the world and seeing if we could cross paths. And something that you guys may not know is that we actually had plans to go to Medellin on March 25th. Marilyn was supposed to be there. Sasha and Rachel were going to be there. Obviously, they ended up being there. And I was so excited to finally meet Marilyn in person after all this time of being internet friends. And I messaged her when we decided that we were going to, or I think like maybe a week before we decided we were going to leave Panama. And I was like, hey, we're not going to be coming to Medellin, unfortunately. And she was like, I don't even know if I can get back to Colombia, because she was in Brazil. And you'll hear her story. She had this crazy whirlwind adventure getting home, and her and I were chatting a lot during this. And so we're really grateful that we were able to have her on the podcast so she can share what it's like as a traveler who doesn't have a home and is trying to go places, but everywhere is shutting their borders so fast, and it just becomes so hard to actually get somewhere. And so Marilyn's going to share what things were like getting from Brazil back to the United States, and there is quite the journey there. And then since she's in New York State, she also shares a little bit about what life has been there. So here is Marilyn. Marilyn, welcome to the podcast today. We're super excited to chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm also excited.
Yeah, it's awesome to connect with you. And where are you joining us from today?
I am in my hometown in New York State, actually.
Amazing. So I'm sure there's interesting stuff going on there, but let's back up. I know you were in Brazil when kind of, let's say, shit hit the fan with everything having to do with coronavirus. So what was kind of your original plan when you were down in Brazil in terms of travel?
Oh, yes. The good old days when I had plans and they seemed like they were going to happen. So I was in Brazil, and my plan was to be in Brazil for about a month. And then I was going to backpack northward, I guess, through Brazil. And I was going to fly back to Rio de Janeiro. And then from Rio de Janeiro, I was going to fly to Medellin in Colombia and just stay there and just hang out and travel and just, work online and do stuff like that. And that flight was on March 20th. So that was plan there. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was interesting because we were actually going to meet up in Medellin for the first time in person, which I was so excited for. And then I think I messaged you and I was like, yeah, so we're not coming to Medellin. And you're like, yeah, I don't think I'm going back to Colombia.
Yep, it's not happening.
Yeah. Do you want to kind of talk about what was happening as everything heated up? Because obviously you went home before the 20th.
Yeah, it's a lot of craziness basically ensued. So as I was traveling northward in Brazil with my friend, we just like kind of were starting to realize that there was a lot more seriousness with the coronavirus happening around the world. And America was suddenly, because I'm from America, obviously, and America was getting more strict with certain things. And as the weeks were winding down, we were like, this seems to be getting much more serious than we were originally aware, because we kind of like put it out of our heads like, oh, this is, China's problem. It's Asia's problem. This isn't our problem. And then it came over to Italy, and then Italy kind of, exploded, as we all know. And that's kind of when we realized, we were like, this is probably not the best thing that's happening. And I think the first thing that kind of stood out to me that really worried me was just like the countries in South America were all kind of in like, what were they doing? They were starting like lockdowns and stuff like that and quarantine. And I was like, this seems a little terrifying. And it was getting closer and closer to March 20th, my flight to Colombia. And as I was going more northward in Brazil, I was getting more and more terrified about the amount of time I was spending in Brazil and if I was going to be able to leave or anything. So, yeah.
And when did you start thinking that going back to the States would be the better call instead of going back to Colombia?
When Colombia decided to shut its borders. They just were like, oh yeah, no foreigners are coming in. And they decided to do that. Oh yeah, right. Let me back this up a little bit. So I had that flight on March 20th to Colombia, right? But I was realizing that was too soon. No, not soon enough, actually. It was not soon enough. So I booked an earlier flight to Colombia. I think it was 4 days before that flight. I was like, I need to get to Colombia. People are closing their borders. I got to get there and hanker down and just survive through the coronavirus there. So as the day before that flight was going to happen, I was on my way to the next city to fly to Rio de Janeiro, then to fly to Colombia. Craziness. And while I was in the back of an SUV, I got this message that it was like, oh yeah, Colombia shut its borders to all foreigners. No one's welcomed into the the country after midnight tonight. And my flight was at, I think it was 5 a.m. the following morning. So I was like, okay, cool. That's fine. So that's when I started to realize, I was like, maybe I should start considering going home, because it seems like this is not a good idea to be here. But yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. Like, how are you feeling in that moment? Because I think, like, just speaking for ourselves, like, there was a lot of stress around, like, oh, is the US going to close its borders to Panama, where we were? Are they going to close, like, are Canada, US going to close their borders and we're not going to be able to fly through the US? Like, there was a lot of, like, what's going to happen, and countries were acting so fast. But I think part of what made it a little less stressful for us is that we were in like an apartment, like we had an apartment that belonged to us, that we were like, we could just stay here. We would be fine. But something that's so crazy about your story is you're like in Brazil. It's not like you're in an apartment. You're traveling around and you're just like trying to get to your next destination. Like, what was that like?
Very good question, actually. It was kind of terrifying. We were in Jericoacoara, which is like in the very, very north of Brazil. And it's like a very small town. It's a very touristy town. I don't know how many people there are, but maybe a couple thousand, if that. So it was a very small town. And I remember I was staying in this Airbnb with my friend, and the owner of the Airbnb was actually from France. And I remember he was panicking, and we were like, it all kind of like happened in a span of like, I don't know, we were there for like 4 days or something. And it just like nothing we were doing in that area was like relaxing us. We were trying to enjoy traveling and like experiencing how gorgeous that area is. And we were like still in the back of our minds constantly thinking about the virus, and borders are closing and people are panicking and it's getting worse and worse every day. And it was wild to not be comfortable in one place. Like you guys were so comfortable in an apartment. Like I wasn't. I couldn't just stay in Jericoacoara. I mean, I guess I could have, but luckily I did not because they're closed off to the world now.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And so you were on your way to the airport before this flight to Colombia got canceled. What happened next?
Oh, yeah. Doesn't end there, does it? So I got to Fortaleza, which from Fortaleza in Brazil, I was going to fly to Rio de Janeiro and then Medellin in Colombia. So on the way to Fortaleza was when I found out that Colombia had closed its borders. So then when I got to my hotel, I was like still fighting going back to America. I was like, I don't want to go home. I could do this, being stubborn as per usual. And so instead I was like, okay, where can I go? Because I want to stay in South America. I still want to continue my travels. I still haven't seen nearly enough of it. I was like, I'm going to go to Peru. So I booked a flight to Peru, which was at 5 a.m. the next morning. Meanwhile, it was 10 p.m. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get some sleep. And then I'm going to wake up early and get my bags packed and go. So while I was laying down in bed, my friend told me that her friend told her that Peru was going to implement their own lockdown and shutting their borders to foreigners. And I was like, okay, but it's not an official statement yet, so I probably will be able to get in on time. And then at 1 a.m., my friend who was in he was in Cusco. He called me and he was like, don't come to Peru. They just closed the borders. No foreigners allowed to come in. You cannot come here. And I was like, that's great.
So 4 hours before your flight.
4 hours. Actually, it was 1:30 when I decided to cancel my flight. So it was right away, 3.5 hours, I guess.
That's crazy.
Yeah. 4.5, 3.5. What's math? Anyway.
3.5.
Yes. Thank you. But yeah, so I had to quickly cancel my flight and luckily I got a refund for it. So that was good. But yeah, so that was just pure chaos at 1 a.m.
Yeah. And so then at that point, were you like, okay, this is when I need, I should just go home. I just need to get back to a country that's not going to close their borders to me.
Exactly. I was like, you know what? No one is going to accept me right now. What am I going to go all the way to Asia, somewhere in random country that might let me in or something? No, I'm going to go home because America was kind of starting to issue warnings to foreigners who are abroad to come home. So I was like, yep, all of this is kind of aligning and I need to go home. So that morning I was at 1:30 a.m. I was talking to my friend who I was with and she's from Boston, the Boston area, but her family had a house in Cape Cod. So she was originally going to go home that morning and she was going to go to Cape Cod herself and self-quarantine for 2 weeks just to keep her parents safe, Mm-hmm. And she was in her groggy state. She was like, why don't you just come to Cape Cod and we'll go hang out there? And I was like, okay. And I just bought a flight to Boston and then we left the following day together.
Wow.
Because as you know, New York, it's crazy now. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I know when we were talking a little bit, it was kind of I guess being from New York, as things are exploding there, it's kind of sure, it's your home country, which makes it more comfortable. But if your home country is in crisis or your home state's in crisis, it's maybe you don't want to be there, which is also kind of scary.
Yeah, that's right. Because you and I were texting the whole entire time this was happening. We were like, what do we do? That's exactly how I was feeling. I was like, well, it seems safer in South America because they had far less cases, and they still do, than in America, and especially in New York, where I'm from. So it was basically okay, do I country where I'm not exactly protected as a foreigner, but there are way less cases of the virus? Or do I go home where there are far more cases, but I do have, protection being a national? So
yeah. It's weird to be in a position of just not knowing if you can get back home. I think it's something that's so alien now. But for us in Panama, especially because we're okay, theoretically you could drive. But then all those Central American countries started closing their borders and we're well, there's only one direct flight to Canada from here and it's sold out for weeks in advance. And so if the US closes its borders to Canadians, then we'll just really be hooped because we can't go anywhere. Yeah, it's crazy. Just weird to be in that position after getting so used to it being so open.
Right. It's wild to think because, as you guys know, as we travel full time, we're always I can go home whenever I want. It's no problem. Mm-hmm. Yeah, whatever. And then this happens and you're like, okay, that might not be an option in like 2 days. So I really either need to go or don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what we had talked about. And I was like, well, like 3 months down the line, like blah, blah, blah. Ryan's like, I think this is going to happen in like a week. Like we need to go home in the next like 5 days if we're going to go. I had been thinking like much more like 3 months down the line, like what if we can't get back to Canada? And then, you know, as you know, because your brother flew through Panama closed their international airport, I think like 5 days after we flew out of there.
Yeah. And that's how fast all of this developed. You know, it's a perfect example that like 5 days after you guys left Panama, they just closed their borders to everybody. And it's crazy how fast this has developed, you know, like I feel like it was maybe a week before I ended up leaving sooner from Brazil, that it just like everything was closing and the numbers were rising in the virus. Like it's really crazy to see how quickly everything just developed and changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so you got home or I guess you got to Boston, you did your self-isolation, turned out healthy, headed back to New York. What's it been like being back in New York?
Interesting. I mean, luckily I'm from a small town where it's like 5,000 people. So it's like not too bad. And there aren't many cases here at all, I think. So like I'm better off. But just like, even just like watching the news or I don't know, just like, it's just constant chaos because the numbers in New York City are increasing. And I think a lot of people are escaping from the city to like the countryside, if you will. Like, for example, when I had to drive from Cape Cod back home. It was like a 5-hour drive or so. And on the way through Massachusetts, it was like all people trying to like come here, all travelers to Massachusetts need to self-quarantine and stuff. And they put that up because there were so many people from New York City, like, you know, fleeing from the city and going to like Cape Cod and different areas to just escape and then spreading the virus. So it's kind of crazy to think. But here specifically, like it's pretty calm. But when I go out, like people are still like wearing masks and stuff. I also try to go to Sam's Club with my dad to like do grocery shopping. And there was just a crazy line out the door because they couldn't let a certain amount of people in. You know, they're only allowed a certain amount of people in the store at one time. So like as someone came out, then a person would go in, which is crazy because there aren't that many people here. So that was interesting to see. So yeah, I can just see like the panic on people's faces as well.
Yeah.
Wow. It's just crazy, really crazy time to be alive.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for sharing that story, Marilyn. And if people want to go find out more about you online, where should they go to learn more about you?
All right. You can check out my blog, which is herquirkyjourney.com. And then you can go on my Instagram, which is Marilyn, but MARRR_Illyn. Good luck with that. And then that's pretty much, and also on Facebook, you can find me for Her Quirky Journey as well. And thank you guys for having me. And thanks for listening to my tale of surviving the virus.
Yeah, thanks
so
for
much.
sharing your story.
Thank you.
All right. We just want to send a big thank you to Marilyn, Sasha, and Rachel for coming on, and everyone else from the previous episode. It's been really cool to connect and share some stories about what things are like in other places around the world at this time where we're all kind of settled in one place. So really hope as well that you're staying safe wherever you are in the world. And we'd love to know more about what this has been like for you. Have your plans changed? Are you somewhere other than your home, hunkered down? What's going on? Let us know in the Facebook group. It's World Wanderers, a community for travelers on Facebook, or send us an email at info@theworldwanders.com. We always love to hear your travel stories and what's going on with everyone who's listening.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd echo everything that Ryan said. We are so grateful that you tuned in for this episode. We hope that you enjoyed hearing the stories from around the world, and we will see you next week.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at World Wanderers 1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.